Welcome to Polymath Park. I'm Patrick Compton. In today's episode, we're going to be continuing our examination into compassion and compersion and empathy and sympathy. These are very crucial terms that I feel are unfortunately being swept under the rug in today's capitalist and consumerist cultures. The having mode and the being mode are being very much neglected and definitely not taught at all in public education systems. So here we go. Every propositional knowledge or every proposition must be founded in the other three P's of knowing: perspectival, participatory, and procedural. This is an axiom or proposition that I like to make going forward. We don't know where states like humility, patience, grace, and gratitude come from, other than from the examples of others. Our values and the pragmatism of our perspectives and behaviors are highly benefited by a default state of humility and open-mindedness, which comes from our awareness of our relation to everyone and everything. When awareness is arrived at without humility, we cannot fully forgive, we cannot feel gratitude, and we cannot fully thank. Through examining how one relates to all things, one can come to empathize to the best of their ability, and one of the best means of doing so is through applied science and philosophy, the acquisition of knowledge, from which we derive wisdom. This baseline established sense of gratitude and humility can really only come from this well-examined sense of relation and relevance realization from a Rakian perspective, how we find ourselves relating to things and how we can relate more. This can be achieved through philosophy or embodying scientific principles or religious ones. Humility also involves self-respect. We cannot come to fully respect others until we have a sense of self-respect for ourselves. This is why some of our more introverted friends can come off as rude or just awkward in social situations. They're trying their best, and they don't know how else to react. Realizing that there are mightier forces than one's own in the universe is a crucial step in one's journey towards arriving at their best lived experience, which is a bit of a vague term, but it'll gain clarity in future episodes. Acknowledging how gratitude and humility work can afford us better connection with our fellow humans. We can also attain a better understanding of our place in the world, and ideally our life fulfillment will increase. I want to take a couple minutes to look at these terms, sympathy and empathy, because these two terms are very similar and we use them a lot in today's world, and we should. So if we're going to be using them, let's get the best definitions that we can. I was looking at Webster's website recently, and I found some interesting backstories behind these words. Quote, "Sympathy is considered older than empathy, having existed in our language for several hundred years before its cousin was introduced, and its greater age is reflected in a wider breadth of meaning. Sympathy may refer to feelings of loyalty or unity or harmony in action or effect, meanings not shared by empathy. In the context where the two words do overlap, sympathy implies sharing or having the capacity to share the feelings of another, while empathy tends to be used to mean imagining or having the capacity to imagine the feelings that one does not actually have." So here we've seen some different definitions of empathy and compassion and sympathy. It's good to reflect on these notions because, as we're going to explore further later in the video, language itself and the way that we think about language and integrate words and their meanings into our vocabulary has a big impact on how we view the world and how we interact with the world, how we communicate with it. And in cognitive behavioral therapy, having more words to put to our emotions and establishing emotional intelligence is also very useful. Reflecting on the meanings of these terms, empathy and compassion, compersion, spending more time repeating their meanings and definitions in different ways, and imagining different examples of how they apply in our everyday lives can aid in the process of establishing better neuropathways. When we look at things this way, deterministically, as Spinoza may have imagined things, then we don't have to imagine each other or ourselves as being stuck in these vengeance mindsets or retribution mindsets, possibly causing us to infer that people are residing in a mode of vengeance, that they're willfully seeking vengeance or willfully seeking karmic retribution or a type of balancing in all situations. Now, this is the way that we talked about things for a while now, and in some instances it's useful, and in some cases it's very detrimental. Logic allows us to avoid relying on our faulty human intuitions to form conclusions. Deductive reasoning allows us to derive ontological answers from reality itself and apply them more confidently in our lives. Deterministic reasoning cuts through the confusion of our flowery language and our emotion-centered ways of describing proclivities and the perennial problems. For instance, thinking about feeding a good wolf or a bad wolf can be a useful example. But viewing people or actions as evil is not as preferable as thinking about what caused them to act in that way in the first place. In this way of thinking, concepts like forgiveness, compassion, compersion, empathy, and sympathy are fortified, and supplant concepts like evil and retribution and vengeance. Emerita. Viewing people's actions or their very nature or being as evil is not as healthy or helpful to think in this way. This can lead us to saying things like, "There goes Jeremy feeding his bad wolf. He's been feeding that wolf for a long time now. This is implying agency, that every time Jeremy is willfully choosing to feed his bad wolf, indulging in his most alluring of temptations, Now, would we say the same thing of a smoker? That they're feeding their bad wolf? We can see how this can lead us to becoming more judgmental of people. Would it not be better to imagine Jeremy as caught up in a chain of causative, affecting factors that have influenced him to continue thinking and acting in the same ways? These factors can be unexamined due to combinatorial explosion. There's simply not enough time or capacity to carry out the deep introspection required for a transformative life change, especially when Jeremy has to work 40 hours a week at a job that he doesn't really enjoy, which also impacts his outlook on life. Now, this is the psychological take. The neuroscientific take is to explain Jeremy's constant going back to the bad wolf as a series of default neuropathways laid down over time, without the conscious individual knowing what's actually happening under the hood. I mean, think about how much this happens, like, how many times we have to apologize for things that we didn't know that we had a tendency to do. It's very often people have to call us out on our bad behavioral patterns. We have constant neuroplasticity that's going on, and this forms dependencies that are similar to addictions that relatively dictate the way that we'll behave and think in certain situations. We subconsciously create these frameworks of how to react in certain situations. And of course we do. That, or in conversation, we'll hear something that a person says, and we'll have a triggered memory reflex of what to respond in that situation, especially if it's something that's very, very relative to us, like memes or sports or something like that, that's in a context that we both deeply share. This is how we often finish each other's sentences, because we have this constant prediction mechanism that's going on. And sometimes we slip up. We shift into the wrong mode of responses. Our behaviors hinge upon the conservation of neurochemical supply to handle our various external situational demands. Now, what this insinuates is that people's actions are predetermined by causes outside of their personal control. And I gotta say, this is largely accurate, given the myriad of fields that study the human condition from so many different angles, and keep stumbling over ways that our own biology and genetics and our bioecological system constantly tugs at us and constantly affects us, our affecting factors. Again, this is why we always default to explaining our various slip-ups throughout the day with statements like, "Oh, don't mind me, I'm just hungry or stressed or tired," or whatever. These can come off as excuses, but often they come straight from the heart, or at least spoken without a filter. It seems that our constant assessment of our brain-body state can be very easy to tap into and report on. More on this later. In this way of thinking, concepts like compassion, compersion, empathy, and gratitude and forgiveness and sympathy are fortified, and supplant concepts like evil and retribution and vengeance, or malice or ill will. So as much as we can find forgiveness and patience with people through deterministic explanation, we should strive to. If we want to, we could call this deterministic forgiveness. Now, thinking that someone is harboring ill will towards us can be useful in certain instances, but often it's a mental shortcut, or at least a lapse in our reasoning. And we do this all the time. We compartmentalize people and reality. We don't want to automatically assume that people have ill will towards us, or that they're actively plotting against us or something, unless we know that's actually what's going on. Unless we have solid evidence that a person is out to get us, or is actively going to make our day bad in some way, or doing something negative to us, then we have nothing to worry about. Often there's way too many factors to uncover at all in this regard, so because of that, we're logically permitted to choose how we feel about the situation. Ideally, we'll approach interactions with loving kindness and empathy. In this example, from a place of mystery, we don't know what this person is going through, and so because of that, we always approach situations with kindness and as much empathy as we can without getting ourselves into trouble. If we know that somebody is stealing our lunch at work, and we have a pattern of that, then yes, we have evidence that this person is actively trying to sabotage us or do something negative to us. And so that is where we can take control, in many ways, of the situation and of how we react to the situation. Most people are going through something that they're not sharing with the rest of the world, and those struggles can be very, very personal and very well hidden. Because we don't know all those factors, because we don't know what these people have been through, or what has caused them to begin down the path of manipulation, or taking advantage of people, or sabotage, or lying or stealing, or any of these behaviors and behavioral patterns, we can always assume the best, and we're going to talk about this more in other future videos as well. We want to always assume the best in the situations instead of assuming the worst, as much as we can do so without getting ourselves into trouble. Again, I'm not trying to say that either way of thinking about these things is preferable ontologically or epistemologically. Really, I'm trying to just start a discussion, so let me know what you think about this in the comments. The few friendships that we have that actually celebrate knowledge, compersion, and deep conversation are the ones that tend to be most meaningful to us. So we should remember to look for friendships that seek to edify and uplift each other, exemplifying compersion over competition. Now, this is not to insinuate that one should simply abandon the friends that they have that aren't on their level of empathy or whatever, but rather be aware of the point at which a friendship may be working against each party, where they might be bringing each other down. Now remember, this is not to say that we can't all change, so continue to encourage each other, but sometimes distance is necessary. Now there's a fun term that's emerged on the internet. It's describing postmodern Western culture, and one of the major setbacks in how capitalism and corporatism is failing today. This term is called WEIRD. It stands for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich, and Democratic Nations. It's weird because these are new ways of being that society has never really dealt with before, or at least like organized civilization hasn't really addressed at such a scale. Weird societies have allowed for millions of people to strive for meaning and make something of their lives, but they also tempt us with some unhelpful sources of meaning and fulfillment as well. We necessarily compartmentalize our realities due to combinatorial explosion, and that compartmentalization unfortunately crosses over into our sense of fulfillment and desire. We aren't aware of how we develop what's meaningful to us. Now, this weird pursuit of the having mode over the being mode does still allow for the development of a sense of inclusion and tribalism, which is clearly so necessary and predominant in our many affecting biological factors and imperatives. But we can interpret that sense of inclusion as involving only those who share our current values, both politically and religiously. This is when confirmation bias leads us to side with only those who believe in our values or agree with us, which is called homophily. And now this example of the having mode could be interpreted as an exclusive justice mindset, from this idea that only those that believe the way that I believe have it right, and I am in my rights to exclude, outgroup, and negatively judge any of those people. We'll talk about this idea of exclusivity and tribalism in the in-group, out-group relationship in future episodes too. A Sadhguru has said something very wise, and I can't remember it exactly, I'm paraphrasing here, but it was something like, we all want the world to be the way that we want it to be. We want the world to bend to our will. But that's not really what we want, though. We want life to be, like he said, a little bit my way and a little bit your way. Because if everyone had their way, the world would be in chaos. What an awesome idea, right? What we want is to share the world's resources, not to fight over ownership. We want to celebrate each other's successes and pleasures, and not reside in a state of envy or jealousy or competition. There is a time and a place for competitive natures and states, and it's within the closely monitored and rule-based systems of sports arenas or competitive gaming organizations. And it's good to have a little bit of competition between friends, but friends don't like it when they get overly competitive with each other. I think there's a line that we really don't examine there that needs to be examined. When you have competition with no rules, you get chaos. And this is what unregulated capitalism looks like. But I digress. I'm not talking about politics here. Now, we've discussed the having mode versus the being mode in previous videos. Erich Fromm coined the term modes of existence in 1976, describing mainly how in which the individual reacts to a broad range of stimuli. He came to realize that most of our pursuits in life fall into either one of two modes, the having mode or the being mode. Now, this has since been expanded to a third mode, the being mode, and we'll talk about these modes in more detail in the next episode. But for now, let's focus on the being mode. Embodying the being mode, as is emphasized in much of Eastern philosophy, involves deep introspection, and slowing down to appreciate life's many joys and challenges. This includes accepting suffering as a fundamental, and generally finding natural ways of being happy by being here now, or, be here now, as Ram Dass liked to talk about it. The having mode is entirely based on the acquisition of material gain for superficial comforts and temporary satisfactions. This is where I quote the Bible in saying, "The love of money is the root of all evil," and "Store not up for yourself treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." The way I interpret this is to say that we should spend our time and money working on ourselves, and from that we can work to help others and be our best to serve our fellow man. Being our best possible selves requires fully examining the organism that we are, mind, body, and other, so that we can get the most out of this biological interfacing system, and so we can have a better chance at countering all of those affecting factors out there that influence our behaviors and actions and thoughts. This is how we establish agency, volitional control, and responsibility. And I mean to say responsibility, the ability to respond properly in the right context. Or as Rebecca might put it, the awareness of the agent-arena relationship has been established through salience landscaping, or through seeking details and relevance realization, like realizing what's relevant in the social contexts and conversation and things like that. We captain a very complex ship. We want to approach life from a place of positive acceptance and engagement. We want to nurture compersion and compassion. We want to nurture compersion. Often this self-centered having mode also results in keeping friends that are more like us, instead of those that may challenge our ideas and ideals. This is called homophily, and it's another one of our perennial problems that we have to deal with. It is our biologically ingrained tendency to befriend those who confirm our previously held biases, which only creates echo chambers in which our biases grow further. Countering this takes effort, because it goes against many neurochemical impulses that would not be there had we first been taught how to contend with them from an early age. Now, those taught to approach life from the being mode have a much better chance at finding fulfillment and contentment in the small things, coming to accept life's sufferings and its biopsychosocial deceptions. The being mode promotes one to more naturally come to aim their compass of desire outward. In these weird, late-stage capitalistic societies, it can be hard to tear away from a life that has its sources of joy and fulfillment founded in the self, our sense of inclusion occupying only the boundaries of our particular democratic nation, enforcing an us-versus-them mentality, which brings us into a state of competition over compersion and revenge over relation. This hero versus villain dichotomy is seen much in Western cultural entertainment and folklore, and is seen across the majority of children's shows. As children, we absorb the idea of villains as enemies, from shows as innocent as Dora the Explorer, with the characters Swiper, the thief, the bane of Dora's many badass expeditions, and Plankton, the clear enemy in many episodes of SpongeBob. Batman and the elusive Joker, Popeye and that wife-beater dude. I could make a list, but I think you get the picture. This exacerbates our natural temptation to view ourselves and our team as the good guys, and those who would defy our ideas and ideals as the bad guys. Imagine growing up being properly taught that we have a natural tendency to put people into categories, or that we should always question our beliefs. We want to approach life from a place of acceptance and positive engagement, and not unnecessary judgment. We can think of trying to convince people to introspect and change their ways as trying to change the course of a cargo ship. There's a great momentum that's difficult to alter, and a direction and a prescribed mission to fulfill. Getting things like this to change takes persistence. Often this persistence requires multiple angles and speaking to people in the language that they find most comfortable. Just as it is hard to turn the giant ship of a life lived as a conservative, fundamentalist, traditionalist, it is certainly hard to ask someone to completely rethink their value structure concerning notions like these. So when we approach those dwelling in the having mode with these ideas, we should begin primarily with gratitude for the privilege of relation and interaction with this human being, and then engage with patience, kindness, and open-mindedness. The ignorant sheep bleats "good" at the Fox News station, reporting an American athlete being locked up for testing positive for marijuana during a sports event in another country. This is the perspective of a justice-based mindset. This is a subjective, closed-minded take. And of course, these takes are developed just as most of our perspectives are, unconsciously, especially when our biases are confirmed. Justice is linked to revenge. We don't want to reside in a justice mindset. We want peace. Peace comes from forgiveness and acceptance of others. We want to remain open and accepting of whatever life throws at us. And whereas much of this justice-seeking may be well-founded, it often does not come from a place of acceptance and compassion. We want positive change in the world, yes, but not revenge. If we must have justice, it should be a patient, pitiful, productive, understanding, and merciful type of justice. We want to always be coming from a place of peace and understanding, seeking to find balance, but not necessarily enforce it. Balance for everyone comes from the patient, humble, and well-informed trading of propositions and hypotheses. We don't want to end up only celebrating when certain parts of life align with the way that we want things to be. We want to approach life from a place of acceptance and positive engagement. We are setting ourselves up for massive disappointment if we approach life with unrealistic expectations centered around a narrow worldview. We want to celebrate others' successes, be glad that the athlete was able to compete in other countries to begin with, not celebrate when the bad guy gets taken down. Try to think of it as her having slipped in her decisions. Or perhaps she intended to do it, but it's both mentally and physically harmless to others, so it doesn't matter. That's why they're called victimless crimes and non-violent crimes. To do otherwise, to celebrate someone being taken down, their life being made worse in any way, due to any cause, is schadenfreude. It is when our capacity for relation and relative empathy ceases, when our capacity for theory of mind is halted, that our emotions can take control, and our unchanging, previously held life narrative solidifies. Now, when we witness these outbursts from traditionalists or fundamentalists, or from those who may compromise free speech, we would do well to remember our tribal underpinnings. Evolutionarily speaking, we celebrate when a perceived threat to our in-group is eliminated, a victory is established. And we all love to see the bad guy get taken down. Just look at how we watch the show Cops or Dog the Bounty Hunter. It could be what we're really witnessing is the moment that these people are having their futures ruined. Likely from them having been abused in the past or had been exposed to drugs or whatever. But we don't think about that. We just think, oh yeah, Dog the Bounty Hunter's gonna take him down, and then bless him with Christ because he's doing the Lord's work. Okay, that's a little bit of a fun example, but I think you understand what I'm getting at. Logic allows us to use the least amount of words and rely on our flimsy human intuition the least when we're trying to form our conclusions. Deductive reasoning allows us to derive ontological answers from reality itself and apply them more confidently to our lives. Nowadays, most of our perceived threats are eliminated, or at least contained, and survival needs as well as comforts are abundant. And we sit back in our lazy boys looking for enemies to other and outgroup because this is what we do until we're taught otherwise. Now, we don't want to admit this. We want to tell ourselves that we have more agency than this, but this is why today's elderly still say the old adage, well, I grew up thinking this way, or whatever. This is not open-mindedness. This does not come from a place of compassion, compersion, or empathy. And this I'm tempted to refer to as the retribution mindset or something. But this honestly is getting a little bit too flowery with the language here. I want to be more specific and deterministic in my implications. And by deterministic, I mean that in two ways. If anything, we can call this settling phenomenon as a compartmentalized mindset, and insinuate less intent and personal agency than what is implied with these vengeance or retribution mindsets. Now, if that works for you, that's good, but I believe what we're really looking at here is a little bit more fundamentally causal and physical in its explanation. In cognitive behavioral therapy, we refer to what's called the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. This is a crucial concept that helped me personally to unlock some personal restrictions I had on myself. Learning the many ways that we can fixate on non-existent problems, and how we can become rigid and fixed in belief systems without realizing it, this was a very useful lesson to me, and I think it's essential that we teach this to children. Our tendency to view everyone and everything as needing to be aligned with our particular belief system is inherently a reductionist thought process in its core. And that belief system going unchecked, or at least not examined as well as it could be, is also easily explained rationally, reductively, and deterministically. Let me give 3 examples. For one, it's easier on the brain. This is referring to combinatorial explosion, which we've talked about in previous videos. This idea that we literally do not have the capacity to consider all the options, so that leads us to compartmentalizing our reality, and that reality includes people and ideas, and that gets us into problems really quick. Again, politics and religion, the 2 most strongly held opinions. This is an idea that's been explored in depth in 4E cognitive sciences today, and is also kind of a fundamental requirement that we're thinking artificial general intelligence will have to have as that progresses. 2. It's literally how language works. We sum up broad ideas and concepts into a single phrase or term. Large ideas and notions become single words, like "didzil," the Filipino word for the gritting of the teeth and the urge to pinch or squeeze something unbearably cute. We don't say all that, we just say gijil, or however you say this word. The Christian fundamentalist isn't going to suddenly start thinking, oh indeed, I suppose the Buddhist way of explaining the afterlife is quite well examined and respectable as well. No, it's difficult. It's like trying to turn a cargo ship. Get someone to uproot their neurochemical default mode network underpinnings, this default mode that their personal life narratives and belief systems hinge upon. Which brings me to point 3. Our psychological explanations of things, our logos. This is rooted in our strongest and most detailed opinions and emotions. Or perhaps that's the other way around. Whether one affords the other is debatable. But the point is, our most strongly held beliefs are like structures for our psychological balance, for our neurostasis to remain stable within. Often these structures have their strongest roots in the explanations of the afterlife, which contends with our most prominent survival instincts, to avoid death. Avoiding this deeply seated fear of mortality that we all seem to have, and avoid thinking about it at all costs. And Sheldon Solomon calls this terror management theory. Now, he's not the only person to come up with this idea. Ernest Becker also wrote about this in his book, The Birth and Death of Meaning. These compartmentalizing structures also dictate how we treat others and organize society. Again, politics and religion. This is why we avoid talking about these topics during Christmas. I mean the holidays. I'm just making an example there. I do actually say the holidays. You see what I'm getting at. When people threaten our belief systems about these topics, alarm systems start to go off in the mind, including the fight, flight, or freeze response, and usually the insular cortex's disgust response, which we've mentioned in previous videos as well. This could also be related to securing our place in the tribe as a deeply seated survival mechanism. So here we have 3 examples of why we find it so hard to relate to each other in group settings, and exemplify compersion and compassion. This is why we must be taught these new terms and integrate them into our language. The language of this country is very much concerned with words that circulate around competition over compersion. So what have we learned today? Well, we've looked at the word compassion and compersion, empathy, sympathy, gratitude, and humility, all these words. They seem to be quite useful to us, and there's another large philosophical question of whether our words do us more harm than good. Obviously, our words and our cognition, combination with our emotions, have brought us to where we are today. That's how we innovated, communicating our ideas and improving on technology that way. What I've been trying to dig at throughout this entire episode is really this capacity that we have for emotional intelligence and increasing and improving on our emotional granularity. These are pretty much the same term, emotional intelligence and granularity. This is described in psychology and used by neuropsychologists and in a lot of psychotherapy today. It essentially describes the patient being able to have more words to describe their reality and more words to put to their conditions. When we do this, when we have these words like compassion, compersion, really specific concepts like Schadenfreude, very specific words, it allows us to pinpoint those flaws and those cognitive hang-ups that we have, and also gain a richer view of reality. In CBT, we talk about these as core beliefs that hinge upon these emotions that aren't always examined as well as they could be. When we're able to both put specific words to our emotions and also work back causally and deterministically through the events that took place and the situations that we're in, then the emotional concept and our attachment to that emotional concept can dissipate. And this is not just me saying this is what a lot of patients seem to report in clinical psychotherapy today. We have a lot of options available to us, and this is definitely one that I want to promote more, because it's one that helped me a lot. And having this medium of YouTube definitely helps to do so. And so I appreciate all of your feedback and all of your attention with these videos. I am still very new to these fields. Anyone out there that has anything to say that they disagree with, please leave it in the comments. I'm trying to learn as much as we all are. If you're interested in seeing more content like this, please feel free to subscribe and share this with other people to get a good conversation going. There's other projects popping up like this around the world, and it really is, as Sam Harris puts it, more and better conversation is going to be the solution to all of our problems. And I can't express my gratitude enough for mediums like this, where it's free and open to the public, where we have access to such great resources like this. So again, thank you. Thanks so much for watching. You can donate to the cause here if you feel it worthy. Much love, and namaste. I'll see you on the next one, friends. Peace. What is the difference between empathy and compassion? Compassion is the broader word. It refers to both an understanding of another's pain and the desire to somehow mitigate that pain. For example, our rationalizations for lying, or withholding the truth, comes more out of cowardice than compassion. Empathy refers to the ability to relate to another person's pain vicariously. For instance, people who are highly egoistic and presumably lacking in empathy keep their own welfare paramount in making moral decisions, like how or whether to help the poor. Viewers can access the Polymath Park Patreon here. Programs like this exist solely by donation, so feel free to contribute whatever you feel this video is worthy. Anything's appreciated.